received a donation of £2,000 from the Lib Dem Friends of Israel.
Peter?
And I'm a Jewish Labour MP.
Let's start off. We very much welcome you, Lord Mann, for appearing. Would you just like to introduce yourself and then we'll get into questions?
Yes, John Mann, Lord Mann. I'm the independent advisor to the government, as I have been. I'm on my 5th Prime Minister.
You are on your 5th Prime Minister. Right, we're going to kick off with questions, and I'd like to bring in Peter Prinsley.
Great. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. So my first question is, what do you see as your role in this issue?
My role is to advise government on anti-Semitism, and I'm independent, so I'm free to do it how I choose, and government's free to keep appointing me or not, and they have done so far. And when I saw what happened in Amsterdam, I thought there was a danger in this country that it would lead to various consequences, and I'd rather boldly say I've been proven almost exactly correct in terms of what has happened. So I went to Amsterdam. I also went to Rotterdam and Utrecht. I met everybody involved, and I talked about what had happened in a huge amount of detail and what they were going to do to prevent such a thing happening again in the future.
So you'd been making representations to the government about the risk of the Israeli football plans coming in?
I wrote a report when I came back.
Yeah.
That was sent across government. It was sent to the police. I had some discussions in relation to it. One I identified as the key problem in Amsterdam. A, there'd been a problem, and B, it had been greatly exaggerated, in my opinion. That the facts bear me out on that. But therefore, because it had been greatly exaggerated all round, if an Israeli team was to play a team in the UK at football, there would be problems. And I identified a range of different scenarios in advance of this fixture. One of them specifically was Aston Villa playing an Israeli team.
Right. So when it was actually established that the Maccabi Tel Aviv were coming to play in Birmingham, did you then make further representations to the government about that?
Yes, I'd made representations during the year. Right. I'd sent my document. It went to Downing Street, it went to the Home Office, it went to DCMS, it went to the police, suggesting what might happen in that scenario and giving some advice. And I've sent a copy of that document, I believe you have that. And when the fixture, I think it was 29th of August, this precise fixture, which was exactly one that I identified as the highest risk, because of the nature of the football stadium, the nature of the community, the diversity of the community, and the numbers of fans who support Maccabi Tel Aviv. I tried to press buttons in order to mitigate and solve the problems that I thought would occur.
So from what I'm hearing is the government must have been well aware, or somebody in the government was well aware of the likely difficulties before the decision was made to ban.
I met with civil servants.
Yeah.
Yes, and I made a specific proposal immediately to everybody, which was that the time of this fixture should be brought forward, and very explicitly, because I identified one of the problems would be that Israeli fans from Tel Aviv, with the 8 o'clock fixed kick-off, had to stay in Birmingham overnight, and therefore whoever's causing whatever kind of problems, the conflict and the issues of dealing with it would be far worse if you had visiting fans staying overnight, whereas an earlier kick-off would allow people to come from London and get back.
So given that what happened did happen, what do you think about the government's response to what happened?
I think government needs to have a clear plan for problems that are identifiable in advance. I think football needs to have a clearer plan, and I think policing needs to have a clearer plan. Everything that happened, in my view, was highly predictable. And not the specific of banning the Israeli fans, but the public interest. Because you have a group of people who very openly and democratically want to prohibit Israeli clubs, football clubs or other sports clubs, playing in this country. So there's going to be a political protest, and that's not just the situation in this country. And you have an Israeli club that's got supporters, and they're going to want to play. So the potential for this being a different kind of problem was obvious to me, and I'd have thought obvious to everyone.
Yeah. So my final question on the basis of what you said is it your opinion that at some point there was a political interference in the decision to ban the supporters? And was this the result of a prejudiced assessment of the advice and information?
Pretty long answer to go through all of that.
So the question
I don't think I was surprised at the decision to ban the fans. I don't think that was the most appropriate decision, nor the most sensible decision in the circumstances. That's got nothing to do with politics. That's got to do with the practicalities of how you avoid conflict in a conflict situation. So what I would have done, and what I proposed when it was clear that the change of kick-off time wasn't changing, but I'd have done this anyway, is I would have insisted that the visiting fans, using a traditional, much-used football policing technique, were required to get their tickets to the match on coaches, went on coaches, were searched before they went on coaches, had a police officer on each coach, and were taken in and out of Birmingham under police escort. That's a scenario I'm very familiar with, scenario I've experienced in this country, and that would have been a better solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask, did you have any discussions with local government, or would that not? Does your role only go to national government?
I wrote to Birmingham City Council. I gave them a copy of my report, I believe. Yes, I did, and I wrote them a letter suggesting the idea of fans coming by coach, that was a tried and tested method in advance of their decision making.
Yes.
So do you think they just ignored that?
Well, Birmingham City Council did.
Yes.
That was highly precise. That was, I think I am very familiar with this area of work. I don't know if this is declaring an interest, but I chair a football supporters group. I chair the supporters group at Leeds, and we run more coaches, far more than any other supporters group in England. So I personally often have to deal with the police and sometimes negotiate with the police over problem football matches and getting away fans safely in and out, safely for themselves, the home fans and the local community. So I wasn't coming from this from some intellectual or political perspective, but a pragmatic perspective. That's where I thought Birmingham City Council doesn't have operational policing powers. Safety advisory groups, my understanding of their powers, they have two powers they could use. They could say that there'll be no fans and the licence to hold the fixture will have no spectators, or they could say there will be no event. That's their powers. Everything else, and certainly in my dealings in the past, would be an operational issue for the police. So the City Council, in fact, can't be in a position, they could suggest things, but they can't enforce detail of how away fans are dealt with.
Thank you.
And I have been an away fan at overseas fixtures, and you have to provide your passport, and there are certain conditions about where you're allowed to get off the underground or whatever it might be as to where you're going. So I think you're...
But we also use that in this country.
Exactly.
I could give plenty of examples of where that happens and has happened.
It's not at all an uncommon thing. You spoke to Home Office officials. Did you have any ministerial
No, I
engagement?
spoke to DCMS officials.
Sorry, DCMS, right.
I had no response from the Home Office.
Okay, so you didn't speak to Home Office officials
I had
at
no
all?
response. The DCMS officials said they would convene a meeting with the Home Office.
Right.
If they did, I wasn't invited to it.
And any ministerial engagement at all?
After the fixture, I spoke to ministers as well. Not before.
Not before, okay.
After the fixture, I spoke to
So
ministers.
the timeline is you went to Alstown, you produced your report, the report went to the government, Home Office have never responded, DCMS did respond then when the fixture was announced, and you'd identified this as a potentially difficult fixture because of the nature of where the ground is and the stadium and its exits and entry and things like that. That's the issue.
At Aston Villa?
Yeah.
No, Aston Villa is a very straightforward ground to take coaches to. It's one of the easiest.
Yeah.
The distance from the A38, which is dual carriageway at Spaghetti Junction, to the stadium. You see, we send our coaches there, so I know. There's choices where they're parked. If Aston Villa are cooperating, and I should say I spoke to Aston Villa a number of times, and I spoke to Maccabi Tel Aviv a number of times. Both were incredibly cooperative, and I have literally no criticisms. They handled the whole issue maturely and sensibly at every stage. Getting coaches to Aston Villa is straightforward. It's one of the easier grounds to do it to because they have sufficient parking at the stadium and around it. So that was a practical possibility, not just a theoretical one.
It seems to me you're an absolutely uniquely placed individual in this respect, because not only are you the government's anti-Semitism advisor, but you have this great expertise in football and football crowds. And you took a great deal of care before this episode to do everything that was expected of you. You produced some advice which seems to have been ignored. Is that a summary of a fair summary?
The role of advisors is to give advice.
I know.
And I should say, I've spoken in Amsterdam at Ajax Football Club on hooligans, ultra groups, football culture, and with Anne Frank House, who have run a campaign called Changing the Chance across Europe. So this kind of work I've been very involved in, including micro discussions in Amsterdam 10 years before this fixture of the football culture, the issue of hooliganism, how that relates to the Jewish community. I could go into infinite detail about it. It's a bit of a distraction, I think, for what you're trying to achieve. But I do have quite a lot of knowledge on the subject, that's, I would say.
El Ribiaradi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lord Mann. You talked about coaches being put on in the UK for similar scenarios, and I wanted to ask if this has ever been done specifically because of threats of racist violence and particular threats to local residents as opposed to people involved in the match.
The issues in relation, when we're dealing with both. When I've negotiated, sometimes it's negotiating, usually it's listening and discussing with the police over football fixtures. The interaction with the local community is absolutely an issue there, because there's the question of how do you separate fans, how many tickets do you get, how do you get in and out, how do you get there safely, how do you avoid a clash between fans. But the interaction with the local community, for example, do you have fans encouraged to go in a city centre before or after a fixture as an away fan? What is the transport from a city centre to a stadium? These are fundamental issues, and the potential clashes or antagonisms could be with people who are going to a football match, but just as easily it could be with locals who, for whatever perspective, feel they have a vested interest in not welcoming you.
And you talk about city centres, and I think about what happened in Amsterdam in particular in terms of where I suppose the fans congregated, and I really want to touch specifically on the issue of the racist violence and the things that were being chanted because of reports of what people like Kick It Out Israel have found Maccabi fans chanting things like, why is school out in Gaza? There are no children there, and death to Arabs. I think the West Midlands Police said that one of their main reasons for the ban was that the hooliganism specifically put local residents at threat, totally unconnected to the match. And I was wondering how, I suppose, you thought there were ways to get around that other than, I suppose, specifically banning them in a way that has been done.
We need to differentiate. I've been with the Kick It Out Israel campaign. I've been to clubs in Israel. I've been to Arab clubs. I've been to Jewish-owned clubs. I've been with them to Maccabi Tel Aviv specifically, and looked at the situation there and looked at the Maccabi Tel Aviv derbies. I've been with them to Beitar Jerusalem. I've been with them to Kfar Saknin. So I'm very familiar with their work. I'm very familiar with the issue of chanting, racist chanting and other aggressive chanting. Quite a bit of the chanting in this country these days is very aggressive, horrific chanting that's not racist. I'm not sure how much of a progression that is, because it used to be all racist. But as an example, the so-called Munich song in relation to Manchester United. If you want to cause problems in Manchester, you go sing that song, it causes problems. And it will get a huge reaction. So there is the question of racist chanting and songs. There's a question of racist violence, or any other violence. And I've looked at the intelligence report of the West Midlands Police, and I struggle with some of the intelligence within it, including the intelligence about Amsterdam, and it doesn't concur with the discussions I had in Amsterdam and the facts I saw in Amsterdam. I had the opportunity to look in great detail at who was arrested, the profile of people arrested, where the arrest took place, what the allegations were, later some of them convictions, what happened when and where. I have a copy, and I believe you have a copy, of the statement of facts done by the Chief of Police from Amsterdam. So what happened in Amsterdam, and what actually generally was a very good policing operation, not a very bad policing operation, almost a classical policing operation, helps inform, but doesn't fully inform the situation in Birmingham, because there were no arrests for Maccabi Tel Aviv fans attacking local Dutch people. There were none. There is a warrant out for one person at the moment. I don't know the details, but I suspect it's for a violent attack. Now, whether that's on police or a local, I don't know, because the details aren't out. But in terms of the big issue of what happened in Amsterdam, that wasn't the big issue, because that didn't happen. So the suggestion that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were going around Amsterdam trying to find local people, specifically from the Muslim community, going, quotes, into Muslim areas, didn't happen. That didn't happen. What happened was that the traditional policing techniques, they acted as ultras. The ultra culture is pretty commonplace, whereby you go to a city, you all go together in your colours in the city centre. That happened here. They mixed with Ajax so-called ultras, who were there drinking the day before in the square all day with them. They sing songs, many of them on both sides, hugely objectionable songs, and from the Israeli side, without question, racist songs. Some flares are let off, and that's it. Now, from a policing point of view, they contained, therefore, those visitors, and on the day itself of the fixture, there was one arrest of one Israeli going from the square, and that was clearly behaving improperly in terms of the policing. So one Israeli was arrested. I believe one person on a Palestinian demonstration that was kept separate was arrested at the same time. That was it on the day till after the fixture. So from a policing point of view, I would say, and my observation to this day is, actually Amsterdam Police with 1,200, not 5,000 police officers, handled it extremely well. It then went wrong after the fixture in the evening. I think there are reasons it went wrong. And there are a number of Israelis who were attacked on the street. 5 were hospitalised, none seriously enough to be detained, and around 30 to 40 had minor injuries. That, in football terms, is an issue. It's not a massive, unusual event, but there is no evidence of any local people from the Netherlands having been injured. None.
Yeah. Sorry, just finally, I suppose a lot of it is about risk, and it seems from what the police were saying their actions were, it was about preventing that risk, and the reports that have come out of Amsterdam, despite the arrests, sound quite different. Obviously, we have very specific laws in this country about racism, so if there was a risk of any sort of chanting, racist chanting, anti-Semitic chanting, would it not be expected that we would put certain measures in place to prevent this before it happened?
Potentially, but the laws in Amsterdam, Netherlands, are not weaker than our laws. So what would I have expected to happen? What I hoped in trying to solve, because clearly, if you have, in my view, if you had, let's say, 1,000, 1,500 Israeli fans walking through Birmingham, staying in Birmingham, the risk increases of something happening significantly. And who the instigators of the problems are can't be, in my view, predicted easily. But the answer to that is you separate out the clashing fans, or the potential clashing fans, or the clashing community and fans. And the way you do that really simply is by reaching agreement that they're going to go on coaches. I mean, it's a pretty simple solution. It's used in derby matches regularly. When my club goes to Newcastle, let me tell you what we have to do. And there's no particular antagonism between my team's Leeds, my club's Leeds, and that's who I'm elected by the fans as, for some reason, to be their fan leader. But there's no particular antagonism between Newcastle and Leeds. But we're required, our coaches, to stop at Washington service station, and then we're taken by police convoy to Newcastle. My members get very aggravated about it because they don't see why they should. It means they have no contact with anyone in Newcastle, football fan or otherwise, and I suspect the rationale the policing know is, well, it may be cheaper to do it that way, it's more efficient to do it that way, it stops a problem. That happens in our country at derby matches regularly to stop those clashes. And those clashes are clashes inside communities. If you take, for example, let me give you an example, Preston versus Blackburn. Both football stadiums are inside communities, big communities, not dissimilar to Aston Villa. So if you have those two clubs which see themselves as major rivals playing, then you want to ensure that the visiting fans from one club don't try and antagonise the whole city of Blackburn or the whole city of Preston, when probably their aim is to antagonise the fans of said club, but they do with their songs, their chants, their behaviour, or the risk is they will to both. Well, that would be an obvious example of where a good police solution would keep those sets of fans away, and has done. And there are many examples like that. And in my view, for the lessons going forward, if you have a view that no Israeli club or fan therefore should be allowed in this country, that's a political view. Yeah. And if one wants to, I don't mean you, if one does, but if one wants to protest that, there were people explicitly in Birmingham who have that view, who said before, during and after that that's what they wanted. So there's going to be a protest because some people think there should be no match taking place. So that has to be dealt with by the police and at a distance by the council. I think my problem with how it was done is some of the intelligence is not very good, some of it's not intelligence at all, and the tactics used could have been better. And I think going forward, my paper's got some recommendations to government. I mean, I think I suggested there should be a small task force done should there be such a fixture anywhere in the country again, so that mitigating the risk and negotiating. See, one surprising factor in negotiating with Maccabi Tel Aviv, the ultras weren't coming. So the Maccabi ultras, the so-called fanatics, weren't coming. Now I know that because after the fixture was, I presume they would be, and that was going to be the problem. And I feared that they'd do what they normally do, which is charter a flight and fly into Birmingham. And I didn't think that would be very helpful. So I spoke to Villa, and I spoke to Maccabi Tel Aviv. I suggested to both clubs that the number of tickets be reduced, that they be coached in, that the fans had to go therefore to London, that they couldn't stay in Birmingham therefore. And Maccabi Tel Aviv told me that they had talked with their ultra groups and their ultra groups wouldn't be going. Now that's part of, you can't stop individuals, well you can, but it's very hard to stop individuals going. But for an ultra group to go, an ultra group will organise their own transport. That means a charter plane from Israel. So they'll organise their own transport over. They go as a group. Ultra culture is about going, it's about collective watching of football. And there are thousands of examples across Europe. It's not particularly a thing in this country. But if I give an example from Saturday in this country, which you perhaps won't be aware of. So on Saturday, Airdrie Football Club played Hamilton in the Scottish Cup. Airdrie won 4-0. There were 345 people at the fixture. Between 70 and 80 of them, the ultras from the two groups, had a mass fight before the fixture. That's 1 in 4 of the spectators had a mass fight. Now that's ultra culture. It's not very helpful. They did it in a field, so probably away from, I'm guessing away from local communities, but that's not very helpful to anybody. So ultra culture needs to be understood in the football context, and these ultras travel as a group. Therefore, when Maccabi Tel Aviv told me they weren't coming, it meant they weren't coming, and it was other people coming. So the risk factor from that reduces dramatically, just as if there was an ultra group from Aston Villa who were antagonistic towards an ultra group in, say, Israel, that's a problem. In this case, there wasn't, because Aston Villa's so-called ultra group's pretty small, and certainly my experience of them has not caused a great deal of problems. Now, I suspect if it's Aston Villa, Birmingham City, it might be a different different context, but generally. So one looks and has to mitigate risk. I'm not sure. If just to read from the report, almost early on in the report, it says the following. This is the intelligence report. The most recent match Maccabi played in the UK was against West Ham in the Europa Conference League on 9th November 2023. This was part of the 23-24 European campaign. It marked Maccabi Tel Aviv's last competitive appearance on UK soil to date. That's in the intelligence report. That didn't happen. West Ham have never played Maccabi Tel Aviv. On that day, West Ham played Olympiacos of Greece and beat them 1-0. I think Tel Aviv were playing in the Ukraine, or not Ukraine, but somewhere playing a Ukrainian team. So in the intelligence report, it says there was a fixture that Maccabi were at in London. Now, if that was the case, what I would expect for a proper police intelligence report is someone would talk to the Metropolitan Police about what happened 2 years ago when these Maccabi hooligans, as they're called, came to London. Because obviously there'll have been problems. They couldn't do that because the fixture didn't take place. But they could have done it if they've asked the Irish police about a fixture in Dundalk. Ireland is not the most positive country towards Israel, I think it's fair to say, certainly its government. Maccabi Tel Aviv played in Dundalk, so there will be a report from the Irish police from not that long ago. The last fixture was actually against Chelsea. I went to it. There were 3,000 Maccabi fans. So there's a Met Police intelligence report and a report of the fixture. Before that, it was Stoke City. Stoke, I think it's reasonable to say, is not too dissimilar from Birmingham in terms of demography. So Maccabi played in Stoke, so there'll be an intelligence report from Stoke. Maccabi have played 103 away European fixtures, 103. That means there's 102 policing reports on Maccabi Tel Aviv. Tickets for next week's match at Stuttgart are on sale in Israel. Maccabi fans are going. The German police have had to make an intelligence report on exactly the same issue for the risks. And I'm looking, UEFA fines clubs. UEFA can give you that information. I had an online meet with UEFA at the start of the process to ask what their procedure was. And UEFA fine clubs. So I can get, and I've looked at, all the fines that Maccabi Tel Aviv have had in the last 25 years. They've had one for what could be called violence. I think the term was crowd disturbance, but I'm calling it violence. It was a small place called Győr in Hungary in 2013. They had a number of incidents with what are called fireworks by UEFA, but in this country we'd call flares. So if I'm looking at what the risk factor with Maccabi fanatics, their ultra group is, it's flares. Because like many ultra groups, they like to use flares. And if they bring flares, that's going to be a problem. And on the same night they played Tel Aviv, AZ Alkmaar played Crystal Palace. They did a march to the match with the police accompanying them. When they marched to Selhurst Park, they were lighting flares, and in fact they were fireworks. They were firing because it was near bonfire night, so you could buy fireworks in this country. I think we'd call them rockets. They were firing, so they weren't flares that you hold up. They were rockets that fired into the local communities. They marched, accompanied by the police, to Selhurst Park. That was the same night. If you look last week, Malmo played at Nottingham Forest. There was fighting by the Malmo fans with stewards and policing at Nottingham Forest. Bayern played at Arsenal. There was fighting between Bayern and the stewards at Arsenal. Celtic played at Rotterdam last week. The Rotterdam fans fired rockets, real fireworks, not flares, into the stadium live time when fans were in the stadium, and Celtic fans were assaulted inside the stadium in significant numbers. That's last week at football. And I mean, I could go on with other examples. You want to see the problem with flares? Ajax's match against Groningen last night was abandoned because the Ajax Ultras, who generally don't have that bad a reputation across Europe, the Ajax Ultras lit so many flares that for safety grounds the match had to be abandoned. And you can see that spectacularly online there. The same thing happened in the Hapoel Maccabi derby after this decision. Not a single flare when that match was cancelled had been fired by Maccabi Tel Aviv because they have a tiny percentage of the stadium for the derby match. They share a stadium. The flares were red, they were Hapoel flares, and it was Hapoel, I can't give a motivation. I think they were partly celebrating the fact that Maccabi had been banned in England, to be honest. So they had a massive pyrotechnic display at the stadium and the police cancelled the match. That's what happened. Now, Maccabi, rationally, in my view, should be seen as a risk on two grounds. And I'm not trying to cover up problems in football. The first is you're right. Their chants are racist. Therefore, if they wander through the streets of Birmingham with their chants, they may well get a reaction. That needs to be avoided. Secondly, with flares, and if you could make a recommendation as this committee that I think would be really useful, I think there needs to be more work done in terms of the potential for flares in football, not just from Israelis, because they're far worse than Israelis in terms of flares, because that's going to be a growing problem in football. And if you look at what happened in Ajax Amsterdam last night, you'll see that. I think that would be extremely helpful. I also think it would be very helpful if the supporters advisory groups were to have a fan representative at their meetings. I think it alters the dynamics. So the Aston Villa fans should have had someone at the meeting, because they've got a perspective in this. Let's say there was a clash between the local community and Maccabi Tel Aviv, and I'm an Aston Villa fan going to the football. People go to football to get away from the world, including politics, to relax. I do, certainly, and everyone I know who goes does. So I'm an Aston Villa fan. I'm caught up in that. They should have had a say in this at the Supporters Advisory Group. That would be a great recommendation, because that means then the fan voice gets to be heard. But some of the stuff in the report simply doesn't match the Amsterdam reports, and I think the evidence has been fitted to try and get a solution, which is a solution, because obviously you don't have the Israeli fans, there's no conflict. But there's an easier, better solution, which would have been simply to force a separation of the fans. And I think the Aston Villa fans, if asked, would have said, well, that'll be a better atmosphere, we'd rather have that. Because if you... a banning of fans needs to be properly intelligence-led. I'll give you an example.
I think we could do moving on to some questions.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I was
It's been very,
giving a long answer.
very interesting, and it's really helping us in terms of what we're doing today. And we probably should reference the fact that last Thursday at the Villa Young Boys game didn't exactly go terribly well in terms of fan behaviour.
Predictably.
Yes. But Paul Kohler has got questions specifically on the West Midlands Police intelligence, and I think perhaps some follow-ups on some of the things you've been saying.
Yeah, and before I go to that, just a very basic question on your report. What you submitted to the Home Office, the DCMS and Birmingham City Council?
Birmingham City Council only in the middle of the dialogue. The others got it in advance, yes.
When did they get it?
They certainly had it by, I think I sent it in January, they certainly had it by June, and the police had it in June.
Okay.
And so June, so well in advance of the fixture being...
Since the police as well?
Police as well, yes.
Okay. What was the reaction?
The police attempted to make... This isn't the West Midlands Police, it's the National Policing Unit. They attempted to get a meeting, which didn't happen, but that's not because they didn't want it to happen. It's because holidays overlapped. DCMS asked for a meeting. I had a meeting, and I alerted them to what I thought in this case, theoretical problems would be, and they said they would convene a meeting in order to discuss my report, but I heard no more.
And Home Office?
Nothing.
And Birmingham City Council, nothing
Birmingham
later
City
on?
Council, nothing.
Okay. Turning to the intelligence used by a quote cited by the West Midlands Police. Now, we know from history from the Iraq War, we know intelligence is sometimes sort of one-word oxymoron, but what's your view of the intelligence used by them or cited by them?
Well, it's inaccurate. It conflates different things. If I can give an example, the report says on match day, and I'm now jumping, but I'm quoting from it, inflammatory actions included tearing down Palestinian flags. That didn't happen on match day. And the day before match day, it was one flag. I actually did a full scan, spending several hours of Amsterdam, of Rotterdam and Utrecht each time, and each day I was there to see how many Palestinian flags there were. And I was surprised how few. And of course, they weren't, the few that I saw weren't hanging outside of buildings, they were in windows. So there is no evidence of more than one flag, and I think pulling down a flag is highly inflammatory and will get a bad reaction. So I'm not minimising the impact of pulling a flag down, but there was one flag pulled down on the Rocken. There weren't flags, and it didn't happen on the Thursday, the match day, it happened on the Wednesday. But this says on match day. That is inaccurate. There is no evidential base of that whatsoever. It says they were running street battles between the two groups throughout the day. That didn't happen. The battles, so-called, were after the fixture ended, after 11:30. Indeed, the Amsterdam police during the day were very successful in keeping different groups. The two groups they particularly identified, there was a what I'd call political protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, anti-Israel protesters, and there were the Maccabi fans. They were very successful in keeping them separate. So that didn't happen on the day, the several attacks on taxi drivers. There were incidents again on the Roke, and it's the same incident. It's about 45 minutes after the flag was pulled down. It's the night before, and again, that's a problem incident. If initially a taxi driver was attacked, I've seen the footage of it, I was showing it in Amsterdam, and then others got involved. It quickly dissipated, but nevertheless, that's rightly identified as a problem. But
Are you aware of the letter Mike O'Hara has sent the committee justifying the police's role in this?
No, I've not been sent that.
He speaks about 500 and 600 Maccabi fans deliberately targeting Muslim communities. What do you say to that?
I've got all the reports from Amsterdam, the Dutch reports. That's conflating two things. That what happened, and it's in their reports, in fact I can cite it from their reports. After the fixture, this is on the Thursday, the fans arrive at 11:30 p.m. in the town centre. Sorry, it's the night before, the Wednesday night. The fans are on the Roken, a flag is pulled down, the police identify that's a group of around 50 fans, who then dissipate. One police report suggests it ends up being around 70, and there's an altercation with taxi drivers. I've seen the footage, there certainly was an altercation. It involved a smaller number, but the maximum number there was 50 to 70. 400 Israeli fans were in a casino. The police got called because there was a group waiting for them outside the casino at about 2:30, waiting to ambush them. So the police came and very efficiently again stopped any major confrontation. So the 400 to 500 figure comes from adding the 400 to that smaller group. Now, the smaller group's still a problem for the police, obviously, and 50 people is a sizable group of in football terms, but it is not 500, and that's what worries me about the report, because they've been conflated, and that happens repeatedly in this report.
Constable, sorry.
So, I mean, I just think what you're trying to say, quite clearly, is that the facts have slightly changed to fit the decision.
Correct.
That would be a summary of what's gone on here. Yeah.
And like the reference to 5,000 officers, is that conceivable? It says 5,000 officers were deployed over a number of days. Does that?
I spoke with the Chief of Police, Mr. Holler. I met the Mayor. I met many other people there. It wasn't 5,000. The figure I've seen cited in their reports is 1,200.
Might that be 1,200 times 4, possibly? 1,200 a day, or was it 1,200
on any one day?
Yeah.
On match day, 1,200.
Yeah. So possibly, if you multiplied it by 4, you might get to 5,000 if you were.
You could, but that might give a different impression. Yes, you could. I see how your logic.
What other factors, apart from the Amsterdam intelligence, do you think influenced the West Midlands Police?
I think the West Midlands Police wanted a solution to a problem, because there was a problem. My report says there would be a problem. So there was a problem. And I don't know whether they attempted to get an earlier kick-off or not. I raised that with them. I don't know if that was attempted and that was ruled out. The solution of using coaches clearly wasn't considered. I mean, I went to the extent of even identifying a potential venue for coaches to assemble in London, which was discreet and very straightforward. A coach operation would have been very, very simple from my football experience. I'm simply surprised at the fact that a football match at West Ham is put at the beginning of the report. To me, it kind of sums up there was a problem and the problem was solved, but it then had to be got through a committee.
To be absolutely clear, are you telling the committee that the safety of Maccabi fans could have been guaranteed?
I'm absolutely certain the safety of Maccabi fans could have been guaranteed if they were taken, and that was my advice to Maccabi Tel Aviv. I said, in my view, you should not have your fans staying in Birmingham. You should not fly directly into Birmingham. You should get your fans to stay in London, and we should bus them from London, and you should accept a low number of tickets. As they'd told me that they didn't anticipate their ultra fans coming, I thought that was very straightforward. But even with their ultra fans coming, fully uniformed in their shirts, etc., it's very straightforward. I give one example. If you have people assemble in London to get their ticket, then that's where they can be searched. So you have more time to search for flares. So you can also deal with the flares issue. And I thought that was very straightforward. And I think going forward, I'd be surprised if the West Midlands Police don't agree that that would be quite a sensible scenario going forward to do, should there be such a fixture again in their jurisdiction.
Just so I can summarise your recommendations, you think the kick-off times need to be looked at so that you don't have the risk of fans staying overnight in a city that it might not be safe. You would use coaches and named tickets, presumably with passports, etc., required to be shown to demonstrate you are who you say you are. You would recommend more checking for flares on going in, which I mean, it does still astonish me that I see flares at football matches. They've been illegal at football matches for years and years and years, and yet somehow the checking that gets done doesn't seem to pick up flares. I don't know where fans secrete them, but they are always there. You think there should be a fan representative on safety advisory groups?
Of when there's football being discussed?
Yeah, and are there any other recommendations that you would make?
Yes, I would. I think it would be very helpful if government was to give a little bit of resource to the Changing the Chance project, which is precisely aimed at racist chants across Europe. Anne Frank House in Amsterdam has been in the lead in it. The German clubs have been very involved. I happen to have the German clubs coming over tomorrow, 20 of them, to meet their English counterparts on racism in football, anti-Semitism in football, which is of course part of racism, and misogyny and sexism in football. And we can learn a lot from Germany. I've suggested that there could perhaps be a partnership, and government might want to ratify between German football and English football, looking at these issues, because in German football they've been very effective at changing the chants. They've been very effective at dealing with, I think probably the right word, sexist and some horrific stuff. Very, very effective. They've been very effective at dealing with anti-Semitism, and I think that exchange would be very, very useful. So if your committee is powerful enough to prompt government, I think that would also be ongoing very helpful. Otherwise we'll be back here again. Statistically, an Israeli team will play a British team in a UEFA fixture. That will happen. The statistical likelihood is high that will happen. Well, a lot of the problems can be avoided by, and I'm much keener to see, my hope of your committee is that we solve the next problem rather than spend all our time on the last problem. That's what I attempted to do by going to Amsterdam and meeting everyone. I wasn't successful, I'm sorry about that, but I was attempting to see what to me was obviously going to be a problem at some stage that I think would have been relatively straightforward to solve. Now, if your objective is no Israeli club playing, which is a political objective, of course it doesn't do that. In fact, in many ways, it counters that because it makes it easier for an Israeli club to play. But that's a separate political issue, which you as politicians can have a view and vote how you want in Parliament on.
Do you think the Home Office is sufficiently engaged on this? I mean, I'm acutely aware as someone who's served in both the DCMS and the Home Office that this responsibility sort of falls between the two departments. I'm struck by you saying that there was no response from the Home Office to your report.
Well, I was told there would be a meeting between DCMS and the Home Office. If there was, I'm not aware of it. I think there should have been if there wasn't. And it's the second time that football policing has hit into Parliament. There's obviously the Casey review, which I think is on a different kind of scale of issue. I'm not sure the two are directly comparable. But people go to football to enjoy themselves, to relax, to avoid, I'll include myself in this, to avoid us, politicians and all of that. They go to football, to have a good time. And, what we attempt to do rightly is, if they do so, to make sure that they're not abusing players or other fans or anybody else in any way, including not least in racism. And generally, we've made big improvements in this country on that. Well, we should continue doing so. And I think some of the lessons learning from this will help to do so, including involving the Jewish community.
Thank you. We're going on to final questions around the impact on community relations. I want to bring Robbie Moore in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just sticking, Lord Mann, on impact on community relations. In your view, was the decision to exclude Maccabi Tel Aviv fans and the subsequent fallout that has happened increased the risk of anti-Semitism in the Jewish community of Birmingham?
The Jewish community of Birmingham feels that. Whether it actually does or doesn't, in a sense, perception is reality. And by the way, that would go for the Muslim community in Birmingham, feeling this is going to be a problem, because there were people telling them it was going to be a problem. Not many actually protested. We were told it'd be 300,000, and it was a very tiny number. I'm not surprised about that. But people's perception is their reality, their fears are their fears. And there are, if I could just quote Game Over Israel, which is an organisation trying to stop Israel playing in any sport. Their director, Ashish Prasha, said the following: Game Over Israel assisted West Midlands Police before issuing a ban on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending a UEFA European League game versus Aston Villa earlier this month by providing reports and evidence from lawyers on the Israeli team's fans' conduct. Now, I don't know if that's true. My suspicion would be, as happened in Amsterdam, there's people trying to take credit. What happened in Amsterdam was, you had the suggestion it was a pogrom, which is nonsense. There were 5 Israeli hospitalised, but not kept in overnight. There were 30 to 40 with minor injuries. Now, that's bad. That is not a pogrom. But there are also people saying, this is a great victory. We've beaten the Israelis. Well done, everyone. Also untrue. So you have people trying to use this. And, I don't know if this Game Over Israel did actually send stuff and have influence. I would hope not. But if they did, that has huge implications for community relations.
So whether it's perception or reality, in terms of the fallout, how would you expect the government to respond to that?
By ensuring that the overwhelming majority in all communities who would like football to go ahead without any hassle and people who are to go to it are heard. I didn't hear a single Aston Villa fan saying, we don't want the we welcome a competitive advantage of not having some away fans cheering on their team, which actually it gave them. Because that's not good sport, that's not how football works. And I think quite the opposite. What I was hearing from Aston Villa fans was, we don't think this is good. Why is this happening? And community relations are damaged if people can't go about their everyday life without hassle. Well, people should be able to go to football without hassle. If I'm Jewish or any other ethnicity, I should be able to go to a football match without any hassle in this country.
Thank you very much, Lord Mann, for your extensive and expansive responses to our questions. It's been very helpful for us in setting the scene for our next 2 panels, where we will go to law enforcement and PCC, and then we'll have the Minister. I'm very, very grateful for you coming today, but I will bring this part of the session to a close and give everyone a slight break between this and the next panel. Order.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.